What's going on, everyone? So the Orlando Magic look real, right? They are having themselves a good season thus far. Still early in the season, right? We have seen teams go off on hot starts and then eventually kind of come back to reality. Look at a team like Utah last year, right? Utah has been abysmal this year. Last year, they really overachieved. They were even the one seed in the Western Conference for a bit, and then they ended up missing the play-in entirely, right? You teams like the Pelicans, even, right? Like every year, you have a team or two that really stands out, starts the season hot, and then ends up kind of resetting back to reality. But I don't necessarily think that that's the case with Orlando. Now, I don't think that Orlando is a championship contender or anything like that, but I do think that they are a good, young, fun team that could really surprise a team in the playoffs. And I think that they are a legit team that could make the playoffs. This is something I've talked about the Orlando Magic the last year and a half since I've had this channel, and we've dove into various teams and stuff. I've talked about how Orlando the last 3 years have had a month stretch, and every one of those years where they have been one of, if not the best teams on both sides of the basketball. They just really haven't been able to put it together. But you're looking at them thus far this season, and they're starting to put it together. Now, as far as defense rating goes, they're number 2 in the league right now at 106.8, right behind the Houston Rockets, which they're 106.8. So they're really tied. But when you look at the pecking order, it is the Houston Rockets number 1, Orlando number 2. Regardless, they are great, right? In that regard, they are really doing what they need to do and getting it done on the defensive side of the basketball. Offensively, they could use a little more of a boost, right? They are kind of middle of the pack when it comes to offense. But when you have that net rating of 5.1 and you're, one of the best defensive teams in the league, you don't have to score as many points as a team that is terrible, right? Take a team like the Indiana Pacers. The Indiana Pacers, by far, have the best offensive rating at 123.6. But they have the worst defensive rating at 120 on the dot. It's worse than Charlotte. The only team that is worse than them right now is the Washington Wizards, who are the worst team in the league at 120.6. Outside of that, it's the Indiana Pacers. So Indiana, their only job is to outscore you. If Indiana doesn't outscore you, they're probably not beating you. So it's not a formula for success. But a team like the Orlando Magic, when you have that defense that you can fall back on, you don't necessarily need to be this top 5 offense, right? That would help, right? And then at that point, then you really are a contender. But again, this young team that is going through the trial and error, that is trying to figure out themselves and their identity. Their offense will get better. Right now, they are 21st in the league in offense, but I don't expect that to be that forever, right? At some point, they're going to figure out their team. They're going to figure out the roster. They're going to figure out, okay, what guys are key guys that we're going to use to grow and develop and use as the building blocks for the future. Obviously, you have Franz and Banchero, 2 guys that are your your key building blocks. And right now, Franz is just, the dude is ridiculous for Orlando. He is their best player currently. Now, I think Banchero will eventually be that guy. And, many people would argue that he is. But Franz, I think, he's been, in my opinion, their best player. But they have so many young pieces. Just drafted Anthony Black. He's shown some nice flashes for this team. They're really guard heavy. So my guess is at some point they start consolidating some of these players, right? What are they going to do with Jonathan Isaac now that he's healthy? And before the injuries, Jonathan Isaac was looking like the next thing, right? Jalen Suggs, he's kind of developed into just this defensive guard. He's starting to really take some strides. And at some point, again, you're going to see these guys and they're going to have to start making the hard calls and hard decisions because you're not going to be able to keep everybody. Markelle Fultz, if I'm not mistaken, he's due for a contract soon. He's been really good for them, but he has injury issues and can't stay healthy at times. So do they look to maybe move him? I within the next year, maybe two, you're going to start seeing them be a bit of buyers and sellers, right? Like I could see them looking to maybe move like a Cole Anthony. There was talks of them moving this draft, right? Jalen Suggs. There was even talks about a trade with the Lakers, where the Lakers would have landed Jalen Suggs, right? So my guess, they're going to unload some of these guards, right? I think they're going to see like, okay, is Jalen Suggs the guy we're going to go with? If he continues to grow and develop and just becoming that defensive, all defensive type guard, or continue to show the potential of that. So then if you do that, well then now you might as well get rid of Cole Anthony and start packaging him. Maybe look to move him. Jonathan Isaac, if he starts coming into his own, do you look at that and go, okay, well, we have like Wendell Carter Jr. and stuff like that. Like, do we really need to keep that guy, right? Like they're going to have to start making some tough decisions and unloading some of these guys. But this team, look, I really do think that they could make some noise this year. I've talked about this in the past. Like, they're one of those teams that I think they're in that kind of like early OKC days. Obviously, they don't have a Kevin Durant or James Harden or something like that. I don't mean necessarily talent-wise, but I mean in the sense of like this up-and-coming young team that they need to start making decisions on. And the wrong decision could just could be a disaster, but the right decisions could turn you into a contender. And that this team needs to go through those lumps, right? Just like OKC. Didn't make the playoffs. Then all of a sudden they make the playoffs, they lose in the first round. Then the next year they lose in the second round. Then the next year they lose in the third round. Then in the next year, they're in the NBA Finals and lose in the NBA Finals. And then it was like, okay, this team is definitely winning an NBA championship in the next few years. And then they made the mistake of getting rid of James Harden. Right? This is what I could see with this team. Where this year, they take those leaps, they get into the playoffs, then all of a sudden they lose in the first round. Maybe they even get swept. And they could lose every one. In the first round, they could go 0-4 and lose every one of those games by 30. I'm not saying that they will, but I'm saying, like, that's fine. That's good. You get the experience. You take the good old-fashioned beating, right? Like, sometimes you need that, right? And then you take your next step forward. So then maybe next year, they lose in the first round again, but maybe they lose in a tough 7. Right? And then the next year they get to the second round. And then the next year, the third round. And then all of a sudden, year 5, they're one of the best teams in the league. They're in the NBA Finals. And we're talking like, wait a minute, are they about to win an NBA championship? Like, I don't think that that's out of the realm of the possibility for this team. Obviously, Banchero, I think, needs to continue to make strides. He needs to continue to grow and develop. He's probably best at the center spot, right? Like, his ability to play the forward is great, but we saw like with Team USA and even in spots with Orlando, like when he's at that center position, just opens up so much more for Orlando. And I think once he kind of gets into his grown man body a little more, gets a better feel and understanding for the game, because again, he's only 21 years old. It's not like he's 30 or 40 here, right? Like, no, the guy's 21 years old. He's in his second year. He's giving you just a hair under 20 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists. The guy's doing everything for Orlando. And I think as he continues to take those strides, as he continues to grow and develop, I think eventually he'll kind of be the center for them. And then you'll have, Franz, if he can continue to just be this constant for them. Because he is, man. Like, Franz is... Dude is really nice. And he's only 22 years old, right? Like, and he's got good height. I mean, Orlando's big, they're long, they're lengthy. They have everything that you could want to, in a couple years, be a legit threat. Like, Orlando's one of the teams that I really have my eye on as far as, like, that youth and could be a problem in 5 years. OKC is definitely another one with like SGA and him still being so young, and then obviously Chet. Chet has been fantastic this year. But outside of that, right? Like, how many teams, like these young teams, are really in that same area, right? And I also think it's funny that both the Thunder are the number 2 seed in the West and the Magic are the number 2 seed in the East. I don't necessarily think that that's how they'll both finish, but we'll see. But I don't think that it's a coincidence. I think they're the two best young teams that are starting to take those strides, and I think that you're going to continue to see that growth over the years. But like, I look at Detroit, not super sold on Detroit. Look, Detroit has some really nice pieces, but I don't think that they're one of the better young teams. I think that they need to kind of figure stuff out. We'll see where Cade Cunningham continues to grow. Jalen Duren, I think, is a really, I mean, he's having himself a season, right? But not really super sold on them. The Wizards, not. Houston, right? They have a nice balance of youth and vets. And like saying Şengün that dude is a problem. So Houston, I definitely would put up there in that conversation as like a team that could start taking some strides. Although I think Houston made the mistake of overpaying for those vets. I like the guys that they got. I think that they've made Houston more stable, but I just think that they heavily overpaid for like, Dylan Brooks and, Fred VanVleet and stuff like that. I think that, and I get it, it's the only way you would have gotten those guys, but still, I just think that they were on the right path. And that could be something that could be an issue for them later on. But outside of that, like, the Blazers, we'll see what happens with Scoot. He's having his troubles. The Spurs, Wemby may or may not be the greatest player ever. I mean, he's having his struggles at times. But I like I do still worry if I'm these other teams about the Spurs, just because they're an organization that has the pedigree and history. Right? So San Antonio, now that they have their building block, I would definitely kind of keep a weary eye on the Spurs. But currently, like as it stands, no pun intended, I think the Thunder and the Magic are the two teams that I put ahead of everybody as far as like these young up and coming teams. And I think that they could be a real problem in the next like 3 to 5 years. And I think Orlando, they have some great tradable pieces. They have some great foundations. I just think if they make the right moves along the way, which is always a concern, right? But if they make the right moves and make the right calls, they're going to be a problem. They really are. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion, so I pass the question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think of Orlando? Do you think that they're for real? Again, I don't think that they're a contender, but do you think that they're a legit playoff team? Do you think that they're a team that can maybe surprise somebody in the playoffs, or at least give a tough matchup, right? Like, do you think if, let's say they finish as like the 4th seed or something, like I could see them making it out of the first round, depending on what that matchup is. But anyway, again, however you feel, whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it. Let me know down